As we enter the most active period of the tropical season, we get a new forecast from the Climate Prediction Center, and we continue flooding down in Florida. So Jeff, Aaron, and I have a lot to talk about today in our August edition of the Water Resources Outlook. Here's Jeff to get us started.
Hello everyone, and let's start with looking at our past precipitation estimates as we always do in our Water Resources Outlook. So we see who really has seen the rain the past 30 days, and that is the Florida Peninsula. Lots of reds, purples, and even white colors there across the Florida Peninsula, and those pinkish purples you see across the area are areas that have seen 10 inches or more. That is about an inch of rain every few days. So lots of rain across the Florida Peninsula since late July. Elsewhere, most areas have been dry. Parts of the Carolinas have seen wet areas, especially closer to the coast, but the mountains have been drier. How dry? Let's look at how these numbers compare to normal. And we see several inches above normal across the Florida Peninsula. North Carolina has been the closest to normal, but most other areas showing yellow and orange colors, meaning an inch or more below normal. So lots of dry weather this late summer. But how has the year been looking? Here we see the departures from normal for the year, and basically a swath of deficits across the middle portion of the southeast, above normal to the north in the mountains, and above normal across the Florida Peninsula. But in the middle there, from central and southern Alabama through most of Georgia and into the Piedmont and coastal plain of the Carolinas, we are seeing deficits for the year greater than 4 inches, and in some pockets there in the orange and red colors, deficits are running more than 10 inches for the year. We see a big difference there between the panhandle of Florida and the peninsula, and we can see it even closer when we look at the yearly rainfall totals for Tampa and Tallahassee for comparison. Tampa has seen a very wet summer this year as they seem to continue to add to their surplus of rainfall with over 10 inches of surplus. Then we see Tallahassee, where they are one of the areas seeing a 10-plus inch deficit. So how has this fared for stream flows? Well, here we have it, the 28-day average stream flows, with most of the southeast running near normal to actually slightly below normal for this time of year across Alabama, Georgia, and parts of North Carolina. But across the Florida Peninsula, especially near Tampa, we see stream flows are running higher than normal. As far as reservoirs, we look at how the pools are doing compared to their target curves. And we see across North Carolina and southern Virginia, the reservoirs are in good shape, with all of them near their target, with actually High Rock running a bit above. Same for the South Carolina reservoirs, though we are seeing, with the recent dry weather now, Lake Hartwell and Lake Thurmond running a bit lower than their targets for this time of year. Then for Georgia, again, the dry and hot weather now beginning to drop pools a bit, and we see Carter's, Lake Lanier, Lake Allatoona, as well as West Point and W.F. George now running just below their target. West into Alabama, we see we're in pretty good shape with just Harris Lake now running a bit below target. And showing the reservoirs in South Alabama, we see the lakes on the Coosa River near their target, but Tallapoosa, we see Lake Thurlow running about 9 feet below target for this time of year, with Lake Martin running a bit higher than target. And this is associated with the lake levels being lowered at Lake Thurlow due to a spillway gate replacement. And from what we understand, the lake should be back to target by the end of the year. So as far as drought, not much change, with about a third of the area in abnormally dry conditions across mostly Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina. Some isolated pockets of drought are embedded in those dry areas. So as far as flood climatology, we see we are in week 34, and this is the time of year we are generally quiet, though tend to have some flooding in the Florida Peninsula, which is what we're seeing now. But over the next several weeks, this ramps up a bit due to the tropical system risk and increased flood potential, which is typical in Central Florida. And we see that here when we look at the Central Florida river flood climatology. Again, we're in week 34, and we see between roughly week 34 and week 39, which is the end of September, we see the most active period of river flooding across Central Florida. And then it cuts off fairly quickly beginning in October as the convective rainy season comes to an end. So which areas are going to see increased river flood threat going into the autumn season, more so than typical? Todd will talk more on that later in the broadcast.
All right, thank you, Jeff. And now looking at the short-range meteorological concerns, we will be dealing with a couple of features that are bringing some rain chances to the southeast. This evening and into tomorrow, a cold front sagging south through the Tennessee Valley will provide a focus for rain, with the heaviest amounts expected over North Carolina and Virginia this evening, spreading into South Carolina and Georgia through Saturday. We're also looking at a tropical disturbance that's currently near the Bahamas that will be moving close to and possibly over the Florida Peninsula over the weekend. Moving this close to land or overland will inhibit the development of it, but it can still bring some enhanced rainfalls to southern Florida. But just how far inland those extend is still a bit uncertain. Rain chances will continue across the southeast Sunday as the cold front stalls out. The tropical disturbance will be moving offshore from Florida, tapping into the warmer waters of the Gulf Stream and enhancing the possibilities of further development. The National Hurricane Center's latest forecast has a 70% chance of development into a tropical cyclone over the next 5 days. We can see this potential development in the surface analysis for 12Z Monday, as a low is finally depicted off the coast of the Carolinas. The stalled front along the coast is expected to help keep this system offshore, but there remains some uncertainty with just how close this system may get to the coastal Carolinas and what those rainfall impacts may be. Again, current expectations are for the highest winds and heaviest rains to remain offshore, but we will continue to monitor the development of this system. While the tropical system will continue to lift offshore early in next week, rainfall chances will persist through the week as the stalled front washes out, but another front begins to sag south through the Ohio Valley before once again stalling out across the southeast as next week comes to an end. Looking at the 7-day precipitation forecast from WPC, you can see the effects of this persistent rainfall with a broad area of 2+ inches across most of the southeast and some considerably higher amounts in a few places such as central Florida. And you can see the higher amounts remaining offshore with the expected track of that tropical system to remain offshore. Looking further ahead into the 8 to 14 day outlook, there's really no clear signal for above or below normal chances, with just a slight indication for above normal precip over the 8 to 14 day period. But there is another disturbance way out over the Atlantic currently that is being monitored and could affect some of those chances. And now I will hand it off to Todd for the longer range outlook.
So as we go from river climatology into tropical climatology, as mentioned in the intro, we are heading into the most active part of the tropical season from that climatology standpoint. Up to this point in the year, we are running at a normal pace for number of storms, with only 2 named storms so far this year, possibly 1 more named storm on the way if Chantal ends up forming. It's at this part of the year that we really watch the Caribbean and the Atlantic Ocean as the major development regions. August and September potential is just about anywhere in the Gulf and nearly all the way out to Africa. And as a lead-in slide to one later on, our ENSO conditions have taken us out of El Nino and back into neutral. Although it is just barely into neutral and the Pacific sea turbid temperatures remain above normal, we are more likely to stay in neutral conditions. We still have a decent chance for El Nino conditions, so a better chance, but almost no chance of sliding into La Nina, at least through the winter period. In addition to going back into neutral conditions for El Nino and La Nina, our sea surface temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico and Atlantic Ocean are above normal. This means there is plenty of fuel for a tropical storm or hurricane if one happens to form. So the neutral ENSO conditions and warm sea surface temperatures have made the Climate Prediction Center increase their chance for an above normal hurricane season from 30 to 45% in this outlook. The potential is there. It's just a matter of getting this season started. As always, this is the time of year we really start to watch the tropics closely, and will begin decision support briefings when we believe it will affect our rivers in the southeast. The Climate Prediction Center's 1-month temperature outlooks keep the southeast warm, as it has been for most of the summer. This will help to dry things out between rainfalls over the southeast, which, based on our 1-month precipitation outlook for September, is near normal. Equal chances of above, near, and below normal precipitation in the southeast. Our seasonal outlook from September through November leans towards wetness along the Atlantic seaboard, and this could have something to do with the warm sea surface temperatures, the potential for tropical activity. This outlook takes us through the end of hurricane season. Because we are expecting to be in neutral ENSO conditions with no El Nino and no La Nina, the winter precipitation outlook is not being swayed to wet or dry at this time. I will say that in some years it seems that when we are warmer than normal and still in neutral conditions, we can sometimes be wet during those times. As we get closer to the winter, we will try to look more closely at some more neutral ENSO forecasts from the past so that we can look at those a little more closely. But let's get through the peak of the hurricane season before we start to address those winter issues. So for our fall outlook, as Jeff mentioned before, it looks like for most of the southeast, we're near normal for a river flood threat just because we've been dry in a lot of the area. However, the Florida Peninsula has been a little bit more wet and is more vulnerable than most of these places. The wild card in all this is if we get a tropical system somewhere in the southeast that obviously drops a lot of rain, that's where we could see those issues. And we can't really pinpoint that right now, but again, our most vulnerable area is the Florida Peninsula. So the bottom line, in the short term, the tropics are heating up, so we are starting to see a little bit more activity, and we'll have to see where that goes. And it does look like Florida will remain active in their wet season. As for the long term, well, now we have neutral ENSO conditions, which means the tropical season might be more active than we first thought in the last couple of months. It might be a little more active than we expected. A wet or a dry fall? Well, there's no clear signals to lean us one way or another. We know that we're going to start off the fall, looks like near normal. It's kind of hard to say, but we have been above normal in temperatures, so it will tend to dry things out. But we will start to look more closely at late fall and into winter in our next Water Resources Outlook, which will be recorded on September 20th, 2019. Have a great month.